We are very happy to host this event and very proud to work with our co-organizers, VoteWatch Europe, Burson-Marsteller, European Youth Forum / League of Young Voters, all of whom have done an amazing job in the build-up to this event, to this election. Well, it's the morning after. We're all a little bleary-eyed, some people with headaches for different reasons, and we're trying to figure out what happened yesterday. We'll talk about the facts and figures. We'll get into that in depth, but this has also been a personal election. Personal especially for me because it was my first chance to vote in the European Parliament election, which qualifies me for the League of Young Voters, I think. But like all elections, a lot depends on the personalities, and we'll get into that. One thing we won't talk about here in our sessions is the technology behind election results and reporting. But if any of you want to talk to the small Spanish company named Skytte that was very involved, did a big job for the European Parliament, they'll be here at lunchtime. And also about technology, if you hear some noise from the back of the room, it sounds like children's laughter. It's because we have a classroom full of 10-year-olds learning computer coding in a room behind you. So there's various things going on in the Microsoft Center today. We have two panels this morning, all on the record. The Twitter hashtag is posted for your use. And we'll start the discussion with the results versus predictions. If I can hand over to the chair of the first panel, Michiel van Hulten, from the Managing Director of VoteWatch Europe. Michiel.
Thank you very much, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Microsoft for hosting this event. We're going to start, as Mark says, with a presentation of the results and trends and what the new parliament will look like, possible coalitions, which David O'Leary is going to give us, and then we're going to continue with a panel discussion of experts who will look at the results and what will happen in the next few weeks from different angles. I'll introduce them when we get to that discussion. They will speak in the order in which they're sitting next to me, so starting with Simon Hicks, and before and after the panel have given their comments and debated the issues, there will also be an opportunity for you in the audience to ask your questions. So, without further ado, David, over to you for the results.
Okay, if we could just have the slides on the screen, please. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to give you the headlines from the European Parliament election, and there are the numbers. So, European People's Party on 212, the Socialists on 186, Liberals on 70, Greens 55, the Far Left on 43, the Conservatives on 44, Europe of Freedom and Democracy 36, and then this very large number of non-attached members, many of whom we assume will either form a new group, the Le Pen-Wilders group that's been spoken about a lot, or join some of the existing groups in the parliaments. So I'm going to look at the 6 biggest member states and give you a quick rundown of the national results. And the place to start is France, where the National Front, led by Marine Le Pen, is the biggest party in France. It won a quarter of the votes in France. The Parti Socialiste, the Socialists, are hit a historic low in terms of seats. They won only around 15% of the votes, and the centre-right UMP won. They lost 10 seats and won around 20% of the votes. So this is how it looks at the moment. We only have results from 7 of the 8 constituencies in France: the Île-de-France and French citizens living abroad has not been declared yet, but this is the projection, with the National Front on 24 seats, UMP 19, and the Socialists on 13. And the Eurosceptic anti-EU theme continues in the UK. UKIP have had their earthquake, which was predicted by the local elections in the UK on Thursday. The Labour Party has just about edged second place, which is a bit concerning for Ed Miliband, a year away from a general election. And the Lib Dems have been absolutely routed. There's only one Liberal Democrat left in the European Parliament. So let's look at the figures. UKIP on 24 seats, including one seat that has not been declared yet, but they're expected to win a seat in Scotland, which the Scottish National Party leader was very keen that they didn't do ahead of the independence referendum. He wants to show that UKIP is an English phenomenon and is not in line with Scottish attitudes to Europe. So a disappointment for him. Labour Party on 20 seats, Conservatives on 19, to which we've added an expected win for the Ulster Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. The Stars are the Northern Irish seats, and the Liberal Democrats on just one seat. In Germany, as expected, the CDU-CSU have won comfortably. The FDP, who achieved a record score last time, have gone down 9 seats, and there will be 14 parties in the new European Parliament. This is after the German courts withdrew the threshold for the European elections. So we have CDU-CSU on 34, the SPD, who actually won 27% of the vote, win 27 seats. And amongst these non-attached members, there are 7 MEPs from the Alternative for Germany party who may join the Conservative grouping. And there are seats for the Ecologist Democrats, the Animal Party, Republicans, the National Democratic Party, which is the extreme right party, the Free Voters, who are likely to join ALDE, the Family Party as well. So a real mixed bag from Germany. In Italy, Matteo Renzi has had a big success. His Democratic Party has won 40% of the votes. And the Five Star Movement actually didn't perform quite as well as had been predicted. They won 17 seats. And amongst the various centre-right parties, Forza Italia won 16% of the vote and is the biggest delegation within the EPP. So 17 MEPs for the EPP, 17 for the Five Star Movement. The Tsipras list, the far-left list, has won 3 seats, according to our projections. And the Democratic Party has won 31 seats, which will make it the biggest delegation in the socialist group. In Spain, another earthquake. The People's Party and the Socialists have taken quite a hammering. From 81, together they got 81% of the votes in 2009. This year they got 49%. The far left and regional parties have gone up, and Podemos, which is a anti-austerity party, has won 5 seats. So the People's Party, 17, including some Catalan party, the Socialists on 14, and amongst these non-attached members, there are 5 MEPs from Podemos, 2 from the Citizens Party, which is mainly based in Catalonia, and 4 from the Union for Progress and Democracy, which may join the ALDE group. Another interesting point here, talking about independence with Scotland, the share of the vote in Catalonia, the turnout in Catalonia, was much, much higher than in Spain. It went up, whereas the rest of Spain actually went down. And the last of the 6 big member states is Poland, where the civic platform of the Prime Minister Donald Tusk and the Law and Justice Party look like they're going to be tied for the number of seats, but the EPP will be the biggest delegation from Poland thanks to the Polish People's Party. And the New Right, the Congress of the New Right, has won 4 MEPs. This is a right-wing libertarian party whose leader has actually said that he wants to turn the Berlaymont into a brothel. So we'll see if that happens. 23 for EPP, 19 for the Law and Justice Party, so they'll be level with the Conservatives to be the biggest delegation in that group, and 5 for the Social Democrats. And a quick run through some of the other countries. In the Netherlands, the Christian Democrats are the biggest party. The D66, the Social Liberals, will have 4 seats, and the VVD 3 seats, which will make the Liberal delegation the biggest Dutch delegation in the Parliament. And the Party for Freedom, Geert Wilders' party, actually made no gains. It won 4 seats, which was the same that it won in 2009. In Greece, Alexis Tsipras and Syriza have topped the poll with 27%. New Democracy was just behind, so the main centre-right party, but PASOK and its coalition only won 8% of the votes. This is another country where the big 2 parties previously won around 60 or 70% of the votes, and it's dropped dramatically. And there are also 3 MEPs for the Golden Dawn. In Denmark, the Danish People's Party has won 4 seats. That's up 2. The Socialists and Democrats Party, so the Social Democrats in Denmark, have won 3 seats, and the Liberals have lost a seat, so they're down to 2. Austria, the 2 main coalition parties win 5 seats each, and the Freedom Party takes 4. In Belgium, the NVR is looking like it's ahead in the European election polls, as it has been in the national polls, but a lot of votes to count in Belgium. And in Bulgaria, the centre-right won 30% of the vote, and the Socialists 18%. And the centre-right has now asked for the resignation of the Socialist Prime Minister. In the Czech Republic, ANO topped the polls. They won 4 seats, and combined, the EPP parties have taken 7 seats. In Finland, the centre-right National Coalition Party and the Liberal Centre Party have won 3 seats each, with Alexander Stubb, Minister of European Affairs, winning the preference votes, with Olli Rehn just behind, and 2 MEPs for the Finns party. In Hungary, Fidesz, the main centre-right party, won 57% of the votes, and Jobbik, although increasing its share of the votes, only won 3 seats, which was the same as in 2009. Portugal, the Socialists have edged out the alliance, the Portugal Alliance, which is the main 2 centre-right parties running together, with almost a completely new slate of MEPs. In Romania, more good news for the Socialist group. The Social Democrats won half the seats. And in Sweden, quite an interesting result, with the Social Democrats going up 1 seat, the Greens going up 1 seat, Sweden Democrats, which is the radical right party, they've gone up 2 seats, they've won 2 seats, and the Feminist Party has won 1 seat. So to finish off, let's look at the European Parliament as it stands now, according to the projections. And this is the change. So we see a massive rise in the number of non-attached members. The EPP have gone down 62 seats, but they still will be the biggest group in the parliaments. And if we're thinking about coalitions for legislation and for the choice of a president of the Commission, it's going to be difficult, because the centre-right coalition, if you take ALDE, EPP and ECR probably unlikely to support Juncker in any case, but that only forms 326 votes. On the centre-left, 354, but a shaky coalition if it were to be formed. So it probably looks like a grand coalition, but such is the defeat, or the retraction of the vote for the big 2 parties, that even that only reaches 398, which is only just more than half of the entire parliament. And one thing that Guy Verhofstadt was saying yesterday is you need to bring me in as well to this grand coalition to make sure that it's a secure pro-European coalition, and that would form 468 votes. And Verhofstadt actually putting himself forward as the candidate for the presidency who can unite everybody. I'm sure other people will have a lot to say about that. So those are the results, the quickfire results. You can get more on our website, europedecides.eu, or follow us on Twitter @EuropeDecides.
Great, thank you very much, David. We'll now move to discuss these findings with our expert panel. To my right, first of all, Simon Hicks, chairman of VoteWatch Europe, and also, or primarily, head of the Department of Government at the London School of Economics. Next to him, Claire Fernandez from the European Network Against Racism, which has been very active in monitoring the rise of the far right in this campaign. And she's French as well, so she'll be able to give an interesting perspective on what has happened in France yesterday. Then Giuseppe Porcaro, who is the Secretary General of the European Youth Forum. European Youth Forum is one of the organizations that is behind the League of Young Voters. VoteWatch Europe is another one, which has been trying to mobilize young voters in this campaign because turnout among young voters has been the big worry for the Parliament in previous editions. So he can give us a perspective perhaps on how that has been going in this campaign. And finally, Poul Christoffersen, who is currently the Danish ambassador to Belgium, but who is here now in a personal capacity, and who will give his perspective primarily as the former Danish permanent representative to the EU, and also from his long experience of head of cabinet to the Secretary General of the Council of Ministers, and who hopefully will be able to shed some light on what's going to happen between now and tomorrow evening before the heads of state and government meet informally to discuss these results. So we look forward to hearing your views, and Simon, I'll start with you. What's your take on these findings? Are you surprised? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, of course, not surprised. Consistent with the forecasts that we've been making, but in fact, we've seen an even bigger success for the anti-establishment protest parties, the populist right, but also on the populist left. And you can think of it as two related trends. One is a Northern Europe, Northwestern Europe support for the radical right, populist right. Issues around free movement of people, not trusting Brussels, not wanting deeper European integration, and then the populist left in southern Europe, and we're seeing this in Greece and in Spain, and in actually Sinn Féin in Ireland, protesting against austerity and doing very well. And so you can see in combination, anti-establishment parties doing well. Only part of this is to do with the EU. Only part of this is sort of Euroscepticism. What we're seeing, I think, is deep structural changes going on in European politics, which is a growing support for anti-establishment parties, particularly among younger and older voters, and 40-somethings like me stuck in the middle voting for old dying parties, and out there are the peasants with their pitchforks against the established parties at the gate, and here we are in our Brussels bubble. I mean, very few of us here probably voted for any of these people. So I do worry about what that means, not just for EU politics, but more also generally for the direction of European politics going forward at the national level as well. And I think it's going to be very difficult for mainstream parties to react to what we've witnessed yesterday.
The Parliament has said that this time would be different. How do you think this campaign, this election has been different, if at all?
I think it's been different in two respects. The first respect is actually the issue of Europe was far more salient in these elections. We've not really seen turnout go up. It's been stable. The decline has stopped. What we've seen is turnout go up in Western Europe, in fact, and continue to go down in Eastern Europe. So we're seeing a bigger gap in terms of engagement in these elections. This has been a more European campaign and a far more engaged campaign in Western Europe. All of the candidates for the Commission President were all West Europeans. If you count, well, I guess you count Tsipras as Southeast Europe, but generally it was a West European campaign for the Commission President. But Europe has been salient because of austerity, because of the free movement of people, and of course it's been different because of the campaign for the Commission President. I think at the beginning, 6-7 weeks ago, people were very sceptical about this campaign for the Commission President. I think now people look back and say, actually, there was a lot more to that than we expected, and I think that's largely down to two people, largely down to Schulz and to Skytte. I think Schulz has come out of this campaign as a far more credible politician than, in a sense, he was when he went in. I think his profile across Europe has risen significantly. His profile even within Germany has risen significantly. I think Skytte has now has emerged as like a new face on the Brussels scene. Is she a potential leader of the Green Group in the European Parliament? Perhaps. So I think that the campaign itself has changed the way we do European electoral politics, and I hope in 5 years we're going to do a similar sort of thing.
And the million-dollar question: will Juncker become the next Commission President?
If I'm taking bets, I'd probably say no. As of right now, today, day after the election, he looks like he's in pole position. But we're already seeing people reneging on previous commitments to support him, starting with Schulz. Schulz already yesterday saying, well, it's not clear that he has a majority. Yes, he won, but he didn't. I was expecting, watching last night, Schulz, was this going to be a concession speech? It was definitely not a concession speech. So I think he doesn't assume it's going to be Juncker. He's trying to negotiate a deal. There's going to have to be a grand coalition. He wants the best deal for the socialists. And if the best deal for the socialists is not Juncker as Commission President, he'll take that deal. The other thing, of course, we're seeing is even EPP leaders starting to backtrack, starting with Viktor Orbán yesterday, who declared that, I couldn't possibly vote for Juncker. So already we have two prime ministers, Cameron and Orbán, saying they're not going to support Juncker. How many more? It won't take many to get a blocking minority in the council. So if I had to bet right now going forward, yes, he's the lead candidate, but he probably, I think, it's going to be close.
Last question this first round. What about the UK? What does yesterday's result mean for the prospects of the UK staying in the EU? Will there be a referendum? How will this impact the general election next year?
There's a lot there. The first thing on that is more than 50% of people in the UK voted for parties who want a referendum now on an in-out referendum for the UK. So around 30% for UKIP and around 23% for the Conservatives. So that's more than 50% of the British public voted for parties who want an in-out referendum ASAP. And there's going to be enormous pressure on Miliband. This is a disastrous election for Labour. A year out to the British general election, they should have won this election by a landslide. That's what normally happens in Britain in European Parliament elections. The opposition party wins these elections big. This local election results and the European election results make it very difficult for Miliband to claim credibly that he's going to win the next election a year from now. So I think bets right now for the British general election is a minority Conservative government. I think the Liberals being wiped out are going to be very wary of doing more deals with the Conservatives again. The Conservatives can't win enough seats north of Birmingham. Labour can't win enough seats south of Birmingham. UKIP, ironically, is the only national party in Britain now. UKIP is second to Labour in the north, second to the Conservatives in the south. Conservatives are not a party, are third in the north, Labour are third in the south. So we're seeing, complete transformation of British politics, unlikely to be a majority in the House of Commons, and Cameron could well be in a position to push through a referendum on Britain's membership of the EU.
Great, thank you. Claire Fernandez, ENA has been campaigning against the far right in this election, as have many other organizations. What is your take on the result?
They're bad. It's not really a surprise. It's not something. Something that we expected. It's not an earthquake, as the French Prime Minister said, but it's definitely perhaps a bigger win for the far right, extreme rights, or candidates who support and would promote policies, racist policies, or xenophobic policies. We've calculated that it's about a 40% increase in the number of these MEPs, so it's quite substantial. But it's not something we didn't expect. In France, for example, Marine Le Pen was definitely sure that she would win. It's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for her. The other mainstream parties definitely are in a legitimacy crisis. They didn't campaign so much. The UMP was a bit split on the EU issue. The socialists rally only very late to Schulz, behind Schulz. And there is a general disappointment in the population as to their performance. It's a bit hard to tell what impacts these groups will have on EU policies and politics. If they form a European group, we might expect changes in policies and slowdown in EU policies, promoting equality. The non-discrimination directive, for example, was a big important part of the debate, but that might not go see the light of the day with this parliament. And so that's also why it's very important that mainstream parties do react jointly against these far-right candidates.
Do you think the campaign against the far right has had an impact, and if so, in which way?
It's hard to tell because it was also for us the first time that we tried to do voter mobilizations. In France it did not work. For instance, when you see the turnout in the Paris suburbs where the most of the minority population live, I think it's about 12%. So it's very low. And I think that's due to the fact that there is really a disengagement in this population, that they don't believe their vote will change anything. They're really disappointed in the performance and of the socialists, who did promise that there would be improvements in the level of racism and discrimination that they encounter. France has the biggest black population in Europe, for example, large number of Muslims and people with an Arabic background. And these people didn't vote, and their vote could have made a difference. So that's really, hopefully, mainstream party will see that, and will see that they need to deliver on their promises towards equality for the future.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to move over to the other side because there's too much feedback on this side. So, final question for you: how do you think this will affect the French attitude to the European Union? I mean, will, for instance, the French government continue to press for an economic government of Europe?
I don't know how it will affect, but definitely the French position in the UN, in the world, will be affected by this result. But also France's internal politics will have to change. I think Marine Le Pen made that very clear. She asked for dissolution of the National Assembly. She's claiming that the Front National is the first party in France, which actually, in terms of number of votes, it's not. Compared to, for example, 2002, when Le Pen was heading also the presidential election. So it will have an impact, and actually they probably will use this result for the internal politics. It's hard to tell also how they will behave in Europe, because if you see their last mandates, they barely were present in Brussels. They don't achieve anything here. They don't work in commission and in committees. So it's hard to tell which impact this delegation will have. It probably will affect the legitimacy of the French government in claiming anything representative.
Okay, thank you. Giuseppe Porcaro, European Youth Forum. As I said, turnout among young voters has been particularly low in previous elections. I don't know if there are any figures yet on voter turnout, but maybe you could say something about how you've been trying to get young voters interested in this campaign, and whether you think that's been a success.
Yes, indeed there are no yet figures about the split of the age groups for the turnout. One thing, general remark that we can see on the turnout is the fact that more or less we are the same level of the last elections, which I think I wouldn't celebrate it as much as it has been done yesterday night, as this is an historical moment. We are reversing the trend. It's 0.1% more than the last election. So I don't think that here we should have glasses of champagne for this 0.1%. And also we should look at some countries which have structural problems on the turnout, which goes beyond, I think, the European elections, but here they are even more visible. And I'm thinking about Slovakia, with 13% of turnout. I mean, when I was looking at this in the hemicycle yesterday at the European Parliament, I would say, what's wrong with this country? I mean, something is deeply wrong with the democratic texture of that country. So this is a little bit first, let's say, a reaction, a show on that. When it comes to the young people mobilization, also here it's a little bit too early to draw conclusions on how we've been managing to mobilize. But there are a couple of elements that might function as signal. For instance, the League of the Young Voters has been operating also at national level. And we had just a small country like Malta, for example, the League of the Young Voters Malta was one of the more active leagues at national level. And we saw that in Malta, indeed, the turnout, the general turnout, also historically speaking, but is one of the highest turnout of a country that doesn't have the right, the all compulsory obligation to vote. But actually, before stopping, I wanted to comment on something that Simon was mentioning about what kind of signal these elections give, also in terms of leadership and composition from, let's say, the perspective of the leadership. One of the things that at the League of the Young Voters we analyzed from the beginning about the way the structural problems that we have with elections and which is the main problem that the so-called mainstream parties have. From the beginning we said if during those elections those parties are not going to engage young people in a different manner, then we are going to have problems like the ones that we observed in France and in the UK. And the problem in France, I think, is much more deeper than the European elections, and I'm not going to comment deeper on that. But there is some signals, for example, and not because I'm Italian, but I want to point out the fact that in Italy, in a country that has a young leader for the first time, has been a clear signal, both in the turnout, even if it's lower than the last time, but it's still a very high turnout. Secondly, that having credible programs and credible young leaders probably can counteract the increase of populist movements as the movement 5 Stars, which was saying we bring everyone home the day before the elections, and actually probably now they need to reconsider a couple of the statements that I've been saying before. Same goes with Greece, because I think that we need to analyze the movement of Tsipras a little bit more deeper than that, because Tsipras was someone that was accepting it is not purely an anti-establishment movement. He was accepting the democratic game of the EC presidential election, first of all, and that's quite interesting. And secondly, again, a young leader. And I think it's definitely an opposition vote, but it's probably not an anti-establishment vote.
And final question for you in this round: where do you think Grillo's MEPs will sit in the European Parliament? Which group will they join?
I don't think that they will join a group. That's my prediction, because they really don't like to make alliances with anyone else. That's my suspect.
Okay, thanks. Paul Skytte, one of the results that we looked at earlier and that's been talked about a lot is the Danish result. What do you make of the Danish result? How should the rest of Europe interpret it? And how do you see the results at the European level more generally?
Well, to take Denmark first, I think the elections in Denmark gave a victory to the Eurosceptics, not the anti-Europeans. I mean, the Danish People's Party, which is the big winner, is not a party that wants Denmark to leave the European Union, but maybe rolling back a bit of European integration. So in many respects, it was a sort of a Cameroon agenda that won in Denmark, while he might be losing in the UK. I also see that you will see the Danish People's Party probably joining the British Conservative group. They certainly will not join Le Pen and the extreme right. So that would be my first comment on Denmark. On the result of the elections in general, Simon clearly mentioned what happens at the extremes. I think it is also interesting to see what happens at the center. And if there is one country where this really has been a good election, it's Germany. And I think these elections, when all the dust will settle, will reinforce even more the role of Germany, and maybe in particular the role of Angela Merkel. the government coalition did well in Germany. There was no negative reaction to the policy having been which they had conducted on the euro. And even though in the countries that have been experienced difficulties over these past years, there were not this solid rejection of the policy being pursued by Brussels as maybe had been expected beforehand. Yes, there was a reaction in Greece, which you can observe, but at a certain point, it looked like the elections would bring the Greek government down, which does not happen. And in Spain, Portugal, Ireland, you cannot really say that these elections show a rejection of the policies being pursued. I also think it's very interesting what happened in Italy, and I think it's a good thing what happened in Italy, that Grillo in the end had only a very limited success, and the big success of Renzi, which might not on all points accept what comes out of Berlin or Brussels, but at least is inside the ball game. So I think this is also an important conclusion to be drawn from the elections. And then returning to my description of Denmark, personally, I do regret that in a way Denmark is moving away from Germany and towards the UK, when the political focus and center and power will increase to the profit of Berlin.
There's been a lot of talk in the campaign about the institutional standoff there's going to be now between the Parliament and the Council about the nomination and election of Commission President. With the benefit of your experience inside the Council and working for member state governments, what do you think will happen between now and tomorrow evening when the leaders meet to discuss the outcome informally? What's happening behind the scenes?
Well, I would say Brussels not very much will be happening. There will be a Coreper meeting, as far as I know, this afternoon, but they will mainly be discussing Ukraine. This is clearly a Chefsache, so the action up to tomorrow night will not be in Brussels. It will be on the phone between capitals. I don't think any major decisions will be taken tomorrow night. Mr. Van Rompuy has already set the scene that tomorrow night will be a first discussion, and that the real showdown will be for later. There's no doubt that the Spitzenkandidat exercise have been viewed by many members of the European Council with some skepticism. To some extent, but only to some extent, of course, it's a power game. But even more, I think it was the reflection that it would be very difficult for senior politicians or to recruit senior politicians as candidate in the Spitzenkandidat exercise. All of that being said, my impression has been that as we got closer to the elections, there were a greater tendency of accepting the inevitable. That it would be too complicated and take too much time and throw the institutions into a turmoil if you try to go up against a clear majority in the parliament. The only thing that could change that would be if the support of the Spitzenkandidaten started to crumble. And I don't think that it is the position of Viktor Orban or even of Cameron that will change that. But there's of course also Italy. What will Berlusconi do? He has quite a number of candidates. So of course that if that happens, then all bets are on. But of course, I think the council still finds itself in the same predicament than before. That in a period of great uncertainty of what is going to happen, who can they find who are ready to stand up as a candidate for Commission President with a big institutional row likely to be pretty down the road. And a final comment, and then is that I think also some would make the reflection that now if we go into a battle, then it's likely to be a battle which will include also the other senior positions. So there's a way in a choice of accepting, say, the outcome of the European elections and take your losses, but keep your powder dry for the two other positions.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. I'm going to take one round of questions from the floor, and I'm going to take all the questions together and then ask the panel to answer in one go, because we have another panel discussion coming up very shortly to talk about the policy implications of the results. So I think we have a microphone. Who would like to ask a question? Can you please say who you are, who you represent, if anyone, and who your question is addressed to? Yes, please. And try and keep it as brief as possible.
Yeah, Jacob Langma with Danish National Radio. It would be for Simon Hicks maybe, and Paul Christoffersen. I mean, if we end up with a situation where one of these Spitzenkandidaten will become Commission President, I mean, this edging in on the treaty by the Parliament will have a success, and there will be no rolling back. We'll have a new constitutional tradition established right there. Isn't that a fact?
Great question. Yes, in the back, over there. You might want to step forward a little bit so people can see you.
Eberhard, energy lobbyist. A question about what should Europhiles do? Should they ask for the European Parliament to play a more important role in the future, taking into consideration that more Eurosceptics will be seated there, or should they better refrain from making the European Parliament a stronger institutional body? The basic question is, will the Council become even stronger, and should it also be?
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, okay, here, the front row, yes.
Alexander, Austrian Press Agency. A question for Ms. Fernandez. Do you think that there will be a right-wing group forming around Front National and other parties, or will they reach those 7 countries they need for that?
My question is for everyone, but probably especially for Simon. Oh, I'm sorry, Amy Krappel, University of Florida, what the heck.
Welcome.
My question is actually, to what extent, if the Spitzencandidate is chosen and the EP follows the long tradition of increasing its own powers through fiat, to what extent is that likely to further continue the trend of weakening of the Commission, because now the European Council will have less control over that institution and who leads it?
Okay, I'll take a final question. If there is one over there, yes, please. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Joanna Maycock from the European Women's Lobby. I just wondered whether any of you have something to say about the implications of these elections on women's leadership and women's rights. A lot of the candidates have talked about a more equal commission in terms of women, but I know we don't know yet the percentage of women who've been elected, but anything that you could say from that perspective would be great. Thanks.
Thank you. Simon, can I start with you and then we'll work down the line?
I'll take the first question and Amy's question together. I think it is a new constitutional tradition that's been established, even if they don't choose Juncker, because I think almost everyone will recognise that this may be a way to actually engage a bit more with the public, involve the public some more in the European election process, I think they will think there should be a candidate from Eastern Europe next time round, from one of the big parties. There should be more women candidates for this. I think in general, part of the... I'm already starting to hear the following, which is, well, the Commission President isn't as powerful as it used to be. And there's lots of other important figures in the Commission who gets the other portfolios. And we have the President of the Council, and there's going to be a new Euro or EMU Commissioner. And to my ears, this means we can live with Juncker as a way of sort of, well, let's allow this process to choose the Commission President, and we'll focus on who are going to be the other big fish who are going to be running Brussels going forward. Let me leave it at that.
Claire?
Yeah, it's hard to tell yet whether these parties will be able to form a group, because we are still, I think, expecting a number of results also from Slovakia. I think they'll try. Definitely, Marine Le Pen has expressed the interest to work with the Austrian party and the Vlaams Balance in Belgium, which actually got one seat, I think. So yes, they'll definitely try.
Giuseppe?
Yeah, I'll probably reply to the energy lobbyist about the power of the parliament. I mean, definitely, I think that it is the only directly democratically elected institution, and we need to accept the results. I think that in any parliament elections, we accept the results, and I think that indeed there has to be a stronger power in the parliament, and in any case, it cannot be done the same kind of attitude that has been closing the parties when they see that the anti-establishment parties have been raising. This is exactly what I was trying to say before. As much as the traditional mainstream party close themselves up and they are afraid of what the people are saying, then the more they're going to lose.
Porcaro?
On the role of the European Parliament in the Spitzenkandidat procedure, yes. If it ends with one of the Spitzenkandidates, yes. Things have changed. I am less certain than Simon that if it ends with another result, that it will have changed. I mean, the European Parliament will have some difficulty in 5 years' time if they didn't prove this time that it could happen. On the question of the European, whether, say, the Council will try to use this occasion to plough back some of its powers. Basically, I don't think so. The Council might be more wary about these interinstitutional agreements that are floating around, in particular if they are not part of them themselves. But I think the Council will really be looking to the European Parliament to see how they manage this situation. I think one of the big worries which I would have is that we will have now the Große Koalition. Will we by that lose what is today part of the EP tradition of, say, great transparency in the way positions are being formulated, a very much bottom-up approach in formulating policies, and see, because you have the Große Koalition, that more will be decided behind closed doors.
We didn't answer the question about gender representation. Sorry about that. It's a little early to tell. I mean, from just my own anecdotally going through the results and looking at some of the candidates, I think there will be more women elected in the European Parliament. I'd like to think that there may be more women party group leaders that could emerge in this Parliament, and we should see more female or women in the Commission. Whether they're going to get senior positions is another matter. All the names being bandied around for various portfolios in the Commission seem to be men. Although there is one woman being mentioned as a possible compromise candidate for Commission President, which is Christine Lagarde. And you know, I've had various conversations with a few people here. One person is convinced she's going to be the Commission President. I won't name names. But I find it difficult to imagine that Hollande would be able to nominate her. But given the collapse of the French socialists in France, I guess anything can happen.
So maybe we can finish this discussion by using the red and green cards that are on your chair, an innovation from Burson-Marsteller, David Earnshaw over there. I think it would be interesting at the end of this discussion, having heard the participants, to see whether people in this room think that Jean-Claude Juncker will become the next Commission President. So if you think Juncker will become the next Commission President, hold up the green card. If you don't think he will, hold up the red card.
We don't have any cards.
It's a majority of red, actually, so very interesting. Okay, thank you very much to the panelists. On to the next panel.
Okay, good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Earnshaw. I'm the CEO of Burson-Marsteller. Thank you for being with us. I'm going to take us straight into the second half of this morning. I'll introduce the speakers first, I think. On my far left, David Harley, former Secretary General of the Socialist Group in the European Parliament, former Deputy Secretary General of the European Parliament. Afka Shark from Microsoft, and a former Dutch MP. One of the victors of this weekend, which we'll come back to. Fabian Zulig from the European Policy Centre, and of course Doru Frantescu, who's going to present his view of how the Parliament might look. You may notice the children behind us are leaving. I'm told they'll be coming back in half an hour, being extremely quiet. Thank you very much, everybody. Doru is going to present to us first about how the coalitions might look, what the policy implications of the Parliament might be. Obviously, in Brussels, policy and process interconnect. We've started talking about the policy implications in the earlier session, and I'm sure this will continue. I also hope in this session we can have more interaction from the audience, and I'll be encouraging a bit more time for questions, which was scheduled. So, over to you first, Doru.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to continue on David's presentation, and I'm going to refer to the results of the elections, but from different perspectives. The first thing that I'm going to do will be to refer to the new balance of power inside each of the main political groups and see which national delegations are going to be the most influent. And then we are going to look again at the coalitions and measure the center-left, center-right coalition, pro- and anti-European forces in the parliament to see then what we can expect in terms of policies. And we'll look at some of the key policy areas. We'll look at the economy, we'll look at the trade, at civil liberties, environment, and others to see to what extent these will be influenced. We base this assumption on the extensive database that we have built over the past few years with the voting behavior of the MEPs. So we have over 7,000 votes, roll call votes cast in the European Parliament, which has allowed us to study the voting behavior of the MEPs. And now we are extrapolating all of these votes on the basis of the new proportions in the Parliament to see what may happen in the next European Parliament, all other things being equal. All right. Apparently this still doesn't work. So we're going to switch to manual override. Okay, so I will first start with the key developments inside the main political groups. I will start with the EPP, and we will look at the new proportions. Most of the EPP delegations have lost seat as absolute numbers, but some of them have lost more than others. So proportionally, interestingly enough, the German delegation, even if it has lost a number of seats, it will continue to be the biggest delegation in the EPP, and proportionally it will have more MEPs than their colleagues. So the German delegation increases its influence in the EPP group, whereas the Italians and the French have the biggest losses. In the S&D group, the Italian delegation, as David said earlier, will be the biggest, but the German delegation will also follow that closely. And the biggest change is the increase of the British delegation, which changes the proportions. The biggest losses from the big delegations is recorded by the Spanish one. And then in the ALDE group, the biggest losses, as you have seen, are recorded by the British delegation, which is almost wiped out, and the German delegation, whereas the Dutch delegation is going up, as well as the French delegation. But as a result of the losses of the British and the German delegation, the ALDE group may be substantially different, and we may see today and tomorrow some more developments in terms of switches from one group to another. But I will leave that for the discussion later. Okay, so now the big question is how will these new numbers affect the policy making and the positions of the parliament? And the conclusion when looking at the figures is that it's no surprise that there is going to be in the next European Parliament less support for strengthening the EU powers, in terms of strengthening the EU institutions, its agencies, or the budget, the annual budget, the multi-annual financial framework. There will be more opposition to increasing this budget and making it more flexible for the institutions and agencies. But nevertheless, there is still going to be a strong pro-European majority in the parliament, which will decrease its size from about 72% in the previous parliament. I'm talking about a combination between the Socialists, the EPP, and ALDE, which decreases to around 63-point-something%, which is still enough to push through legislation on strengthening the EU powers wherever these forces at the center left and center right agree among themselves. And now we see more or less the exact projected numbers. As I said, the super ground coalition between EPP and S&D and ALDE decreases from 72 to about 63%, a loss of almost 9%. And if we only put together EPP and S&D, we will only have about 53%, so very, very slim majority of these two groups combined, the reason for which probably they will need ALDE as much as possible to be on their side to come up with a pro-European majority. But that means that in areas where only the EPP and the S&D agrees, that will not be enough. They will still have to get votes from some other place in order to push through. So that almost cliche that if these two groups agree, then the others don't matter is not valid anymore. And then the anti-European forces, both radicals and moderate anti-Europeans, have made significant gains. Combining the far right and the far left, we end up with a plus of over 9%, so from 20 to 29-point-something% in this parliament. So a third of the votes are, we shall see, quite unpredictable to where they will go. And this unpredictability will be projected also on issues where the center left and center right disagree. So here we see the possible types of majorities. The EPP, ALDE, center-right coalition will no longer exist. They held 46% of the seats in the previous parliament. They will only hold around 38, so very, very slim coalition. And then even if they get ECR on their side on issues where they agree with ECR, such as opening of the international trade, that will still not be enough to have 50%, they will only have 45%. If we look at things the other way around from the center-left perspective, and then the situation is quite similar. The S&D, Greens, and GUI only account for 38% of the seats. And even on issues where they can get the ALDE on their side, such as on environment and civil liberties, where ALDE votes along with the left and center-left forces, they still don't get 50% of the votes. So all of this picture tells us one thing, that the coalition formation in the next European Parliament will be much more complicated, and therefore the results will become more unpredictable. If we then look at some of the key policy areas, such as economy, what we can expect by looking at the voting behavior of the current MEPs, and with a certain margin of error, because in the current parliament we don't have MEPs from a number of key national parties, such as we don't have Bepes Grillo's MEP, so we don't know exactly what's on their mind. We'll have to wait until the first few plenaries to see how exactly these guys will be voting. But letting alone this margin of error, we would expect the position of the parliament to be less favorable than currently to budget consolidation, and to be more open to more public spending. That's what we would expect. And the push for the tax harmonization, this is yet unknown. This is uncertain what's going to happen with this. There has been a push in this current parliament, but with the new proportions, with particularly with the anti-Europeans getting stronger, this push may be put on a hold. We would expect, however, more regulation to be tried to be pushed through from Brussels. Where we would expect this to work would be on the financial sector, where the EPP and SND, they have more or less reached agreements towards the end of the previous term, and that's likely to continue. Unemployment, we would probably see a parliament which will try to push through more social indicators also to be followed through the European semester, the procedure of supervision by the European Commission of macroeconomic policies of the member states. So this supervision will become more flexible, will probably no longer be focused that much on the budget discipline, but will also have to take into consideration some social indicators. Of course, the parliament doesn't have a big power here, but I'm only talking about what the parliament can ask. Whether the commission will take this into consideration or in the council or not, that's a different discussion. Other pushes by the parliament may be more in the direction of, let's say, more labor-friendly legislation. But here again, as we've seen, the gains made by the left are minimal, of about the share of the votes that went from center-right to center-left is only of about 1-point-something%, so not that much. However, the left may take advantage of the fact that the center-right majority has lost seats at towards these seats going towards the far left. So proportionally, the center-left has become stronger compared to the center-right, and therefore they may ask for more labor-friendly legislation in terms of working time directive or other directives that regard the working conditions. And now comes the more interesting part, particularly for those involved in trade and internal market. We would expect that the negotiations on the TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Agreement, to become significantly more complicated as a result of the new proportions in the parliament, because on the one hand you have the anti-Europeans who don't recognize the right of the European Commission to negotiate on behalf of the member states international trade agreements. And on the other hand, you have the slight increase of the center-left proportionally, who has some reservations with regard to this agreement, particularly reservations that concern the environmental and social standards, but also the opposition to the investor-to-state dispute settlement mechanism, which, under these conditions, I would see it difficult to be inserted into this agreement. There will also be more questioning of the strengthening of the internal market, and particularly in what regards the internal market for services. A couple of months ago, towards the end of the current term, there was a resolution adopted by the parliament, a non-legislative one, but still which pretty much defined the lines between the center-left, who opposed a strengthening of the internal market for services out of concerns for some social standards. And this resolution, which passed in the current parliament for strengthening the internal market for services, with the new proportions, it wouldn't pass in the next European Parliament. So we see a shift of the majority. On energy, the next parliament will likely continue to be very favorable overall to seeing the nuclear energy as playing a key role in the medium and long-term energy mix of the European Union. And given also the developments on the eastern neighborhood, we would expect that the position of a majority of MEPs will be in favor of trying to exploit other resources of energy, such as shale gas and oil. What is clear is that Both the EPP and SND support the creation of a pan-European energy infrastructure, so there will be substantial support in this direction. And this process of financing this pan-European energy infrastructure will continue. On environment, here we have mixed signals. We have this slight increase of the center-left, who is generally supportive of more ambitious climate targets. But on the other hand, the Greens haven't done that well, which also signals the fact that the environmental issues are not the top priority of the electorate at the moment. So we would expect here not something spectacular, but rather a step-by-step approach by the European Commission, judging by the proportions in the Parliament. And from the other point of view, the point of view of reindustrialization, a policy pushed by the business environment and also agreed upon by most of the Commission, this is uncertain what's going to happen. The majority is on climate change policies versus industrialization will be very, very slim, and the results on this very difficult to predict. Lastly, and where we can predict things more safely, is on migration. We will probably see a parliament or a part of the parliament which will be much more vocal to stopping the migration, as we've discussed in the previous panel. With more far-right and nationalists in the European Parliament, this issue will probably be put on the agenda of the parliament much more often. And the far-right, even though they haven't been extremely influent in shaping the legislation in the current term, they have shown that they can be very vocal. So that is, they speak a lot. Maybe they don't do a lot, but they speak a lot, and they will speak much more in the next European Parliament, also because they will have more time to do so, as the time is being allocated proportionally to their seats. Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your question on that.
I'm going to kick off the discussion and ask each of our, well, apart from Doru, ask each of our three speakers to respond briefly about how they see the Parliament going forward. One of the assumptions of Doru, which I'll just draw out a little bit more strongly, I think, is that we're going to see more of a pro and anti cleavage in the Parliament, that the era of different majorities on different issues, centre-left on environment, centre-right on economic, etc., those days might be coming to an end, and we might enter more into a pro and anti-Europe cleavage in the Parliament, perhaps. In other words, a squeezed centre. So with that idea, could David, Afka and Fabian just give us a first reaction about how you see the Parliament in grand, big terms? David.
Okay, I'll be happy to try and start answering that. I think everybody realizes that this situation this morning is generally quite fluid and uncertain in many respects. So to answer David's question, I would divide the future into two parts. First of all, what is going to take place according to best guesses concerning the procedure for appointing and electing the next president of the Commission. And after that, because the way that turns out will affect the rest, the second part will be how the European Parliament might organize itself in terms of coalitions. Now, I was told in the corridors of the European Parliament yesterday evening that when the Conference of Presidents meets tomorrow, they will tell Mr. Schulz, who despite Mrs. Merkel's entreaties will still be chairing the meeting tomorrow, that will establish the Parliament's position and Mr. Schulz's own future, and nobody apparently sees any significant conflict of interest there. But anyway, Mr. Schulz has got all the cards in his hand at the moment, and rightly so, because he has achieved a personal triumph in Germany, watching the scenes of euphoria and great admiration and affection expressed towards Mr. Schulz in the Willy Brandt house in Berlin yesterday. It was really something quite special. And the national news programs cut off the leader of the SPD, Mr. Gabriel, because Mr. Schulz was about to speak. This is pretty unusual. And so he's got a lot of credit. And one should not underestimate the significance of the SPD showing, Mr. Schulz's prestige and name recognition in Germany now, and his contribution, almost single-handedly, to increasing the turnout in Germany by 5%, which is really quite a big deal. So as he himself said last night in one of his many interviews, he's got the wind behind him at the moment. And at the meeting tomorrow, the heads of the political groups, the chairs of the political groups, are going to tell Mr. Schulz, to tell Mr. Van Rompuy to take his time, that Mr. Van Rompuy would be well advised to speak to all the group chairs, if possible, all the prime ministers, and find a solution that is balanced and equitable and that respects the prerogatives of both institutions. And in the meantime, people will be trying to build majorities. And the longer it takes for some people, the better it will be in their interests of forming a majority. There's one small difficulty there, and that is that the S&D group didn't perform quite as well as they had expected, or indeed as a number of people had expected. And whereas, according to the last predictions before the elections, Mr. Schulz and the S&D group only had to get 19 votes from the non-attached members. Now it's gone up to 30 or so, and it's going to be hard to play for. So there's a small chance of this whole process backfiring on the European Parliament. There is little doubt, if I can stick my neck out slightly, that it will be extremely difficult for Mr. Juncker to find a majority in the European Parliament at the moment, which will not, of course, prevent the European Council and Mr. Van Rompuy, on Mr. Van Rompuy's proposal, to propose Mr. Juncker, knowing in advance that he may be defeated in the European Parliament, a result which could actually help certain people. But perhaps that's in the realm of fantasy. But this is why we're into a period of multi-dimensional shadow boxing, with many different things going on at the same time. And it's only when that has reached its conclusion that we will know how the European Parliament will approach coalitions, how they will deal with the anti-establishment parties, where the policy priorities will be. We need to know more about the personalities, who the group chairs will be, who the committee chairs will be. And as one of the previous panelists said, the role of Germany and German MEPs will be fairly decisive in a number of these decisions. Once again, because of the numerical advantage, which is completely justified, because Germany has 96 MEPs, 23 more than the other largest member states, often there will be one or two German MEPs at that crucial vote in whatever committee who will make the difference. And again, we have in the EPP group, largest delegation happens to be German. In the S&D group, the second largest delegation, following the slightly surprising results of Mr. Renzi and the Italian Democrats. The German delegation, the S&D group, will only be the second largest. So Germany will certainly be very in a position of particular influence. Now, I would just like to end, because I'm sure David's getting nervous that I'm rambling on a bit, that on a personal consideration about a sort of philosophical point about grand coalitions. Personally, I think the European Parliament has spent too much time forming grand coalitions. They've spent 10 years having cosy relationships between the two largest groups, and that has been useful for processing legislation, but possibly not so good for the politics and indeed for the political image of the institution. And it really would be an ultimate irony if all these protest parties and MEPs elected by anti-establishment parties are now completely excluded from the decision-making process in the new parliament, and an even more ultimate irony if the European Parliament is going to do away with decisions behind closed doors in the European Council and introduce decisions behind closed doors in the European Parliament.
Thank you very much, David. I wasn't getting too nervous.
Can I speak some more?
Afka, could we move on to you?
Perhaps if you could orient your contribution to the perspective of business, that might be useful. And just taking off where David finished, does business have to start talking a little bit more frequently and a little bit more deeply with some of the more sceptical parts of the Parliament, some of the more Eurosceptic parts of the Parliament?
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be in a room with all you political junkies. Hope it was not too late. And thank you, David, for organizing this. And well, to come back to your question, I think actually in Brussels, and I myself have a background in local politics in the Netherlands, but in Brussels, I think industry is actually doing a fine job in meeting with MEPs, well, from the former parliament. And I'm just sure, because industry is more or less neutral, that we will be able to meet with all the new MEPs as well, coming from left wing, right wing, middle, center. Doesn't matter, because that's, for us, it's not an issue. And also from my background, when you want to be successful in politics, you just have to be really, really pragmatic. And if you're an ordinary MEP, you just have to work together and get agreements and coalitions with fellow MEPs in order to achieve something. So yeah, you just have to work with that. But on the other hand, I'm a little bit worried because it is politics, so it's all about arguments that are actually not that valid. So, for example, my party in the Liberals that I represent in the Netherlands, the Liberal Party, the biggest one, which actually has our Prime Minister Mark Rutte, was not able to force a coalition with the other Liberal Party who actually won the elections for the European Parliament in the Netherlands, to get a coalition electoral alliance, if that is the right word. Michiel, I'm just checking with you if that is the right word, an electoral alliance, and that was actually a bit worrying. So on the one hand, I'm not so worried, because I think in the end MEPs will always be very, very pragmatic. But on the other hand, sometimes even within your own group, people have incompatibilité des humeurs and cannot work together. So and we will have to see and work with that. So myself, I've been working in the Netherlands in the parliament together with Geert Wilders, my party, the VVD, and the Christian Democrats. And in the end, on all the issues that are important for business, and I was the spokesperson for economic affairs, we actually achieved quite a bit. Because on those issues, a lot of the parties we're in favor of European employment and to European companies. So and there are a lot of things that the MEPs have to deal with. So, for example, for Microsoft, it's very important, the data protection directive, single telecoms package, and all of this. And that will, that has been discussed in the previous parliament, but that will be carried over to the new parliament. And what we will do, we will just actually go and talk to as many people as possible. And for us, there are actually 3 moments. So it's not only the election of the Commission President, how the groups are forged, but also the committees. So July is actually the first and second week of July. Those are the most important for industry right now, because then the chairs are elected, the committees are elected, and one of my fellow countrymen, Marietje Schaken of D66, has actually asked for a single committee responsible for all digital items. So that could be of interest, and that could be something that we would like to support. So there are many options, many topics to be dealt with, and we will see. But it's just something that we cannot influence, we will not enforce upon. It's just we will work with every MEP, and every MEP is welcome to visit our lovely Microsoft Center, and we will be happy to work with them all.
Okay, thank you, Afka. Fabian, how do you see things from the European Policy Centre?
I think clearly we are now in a period where there will be a lot of political deal making. I would expect that particularly the member states have an interest to slow the process down, to not actually make too many decisions quickly, because the focus is going to shift away from Brussels. We're not going to see so much focus in the media and other places. And I think the member states will reassert some of their power. We shouldn't forget that they also have a direct link to a number of MEPs, where they can direct what the MEPs then will do. So I would expect that the member states will come back. And I also think it's important to recognize that we're talking about who won the election, who had the biggest gains. Clearly, the biggest winner of this election, unfortunately, still is apathy. we still have a very low turnout. Yes, it is marginally better than before, but overall, European citizens do not see this election as particularly important, as particularly poignant for what they think. And we have to also look, I think, at this experience with Spitzenkandidaten in that light. Do we really see a much more legitimized parliament because of this? I think we have seen that it has changed some of the national debates. Yes, Germany, we have seen some impact. But overall, the picture is we still have predominantly domestic debates. We have a lot of anti-establishment protest votes. And we're not seeing, I think, a feeling in voters that the parliament which is going to come in is more legitimate, is more representing them. So I think it's quite a negative picture, and I think the biggest shift we are going to see is not at the European Parliament level. What we are going to see is that mainstream parties across Europe are going to shift to try to accommodate these protest votes. So we're going to shift to the right, we're going to shift to more populist positions, anti-immigrant positions, more Eurosceptic positions. So I think we are going to see a big impact on the domestic agenda. I think the parliament here is going to function. It's going to have a slightly different dynamic with the Grand Coalition, but it will overall function. But the big changes are going to be in countries like France, like the UK, and there I'm quite worried. I mean, if we look at France, I think most people in this town, despite the role of Germany, would expect that if France is uncertain, if France is not behind the European integration process, then very little will happen. I think what we will also see is that the tendency towards a referendum, an in-out referendum in the UK is going to increase. And I think what we're seeing across the board in pretty much every European country is a feeling that we don't want more Europe. We just want to stop doing more at the European level. So I think overall, I think it's fairly negative.
Thank you, Fabian. I hope everybody is not feeling too depressed.
Sorry.
Doru earlier mentioned TTIP. Let's use TTIP as an example, just for one more round of contributions from the panel. I was struck that in Belgium, every French-speaking party in Belgium is against TTIP in its current form. It goes across the political spectrum. So if we just use TTIP as the example, what future for that kind of international trade negotiation in the new parliament? Let's start with Fabian and work the other way.
I think for TTIP, clearly we've had problems before the election. There were a number of protests against TTIP coming up strongly in countries where it really matters, particularly Germany. I think for a major trade deal, if Germany is not behind it, given its weight also in the EPP, it's quite difficult to see how you would do it. I think this has been reinforced. It remains to be seen in how far the extremist votes will actually play an active role in the parliament. I think that's something we can't really predict at the moment. We have seen in the past that those on the Eurosceptic end, the populist end, aren't really that interested in working on the day-to-day level in the parliament. But it might well be that when it comes to a big vote on something like TTIP, that they will show up and that they will cast their vote. In which case, the only way you could push something like TTIP through is a coalition between the two big blocs. I mean, that really would have to be, and it would have to be an effective coalition. It couldn't be something where particular countries could decide differently. You really would have to have quite a degree of party discipline between the two big blocs, and probably ALDE, of course, also being in there. But I think it would be far more difficult. So really what this means, in my view, is if you want to get something like TTIP through, you have to make a political deal between the big parties and then see in how far you can actually translate that deal in the negotiations.
Thank you, Fabian. Afka?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think TTIP could actually be the new ACTA or the same around net neutrality, what happens around it. It's actually a lot of protest is arising. Last week, well, or maybe 2 weeks ago, I don't know, at the Business Europe Summit, there was a lot going on, lots of protests. I was actually at the Avenue Louise. There was a sit-in from many people over there. And that for me was actually the first time that I noticed that this is going to be a very, very political theme. And that's the thing that that MEPs have to have in mind, and all policymakers actually, because if this is going to be such a media hype and like ACTA was actually, then people tend to forget what was actually the content of the agreement, and it's all about the form and the protest, and in the end you actually don't know anymore what you are fighting against. So, which I'm actually not arguing for or against TTIP in any way, but I'm just commenting on the political side of this. And I think this you can actually see a lot of signs that TTIP is going to be a very, very big political theme. And yeah, we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, thanks, Afka. David?
I thought it was an interesting idea that the future of TTIP depends on an agreement between the two largest political groups in the European Parliament, because up until now the European Parliament hasn't had much to say legally or in terms of its treaty provisions. So if we're sort of celebrating the new powerful European Parliament, well, let's start with a trade agreement with the United States, give it to the Parliament. But it's one of those issues which is an example of what I find very worrying, the increasing culture wars that we are beginning to find ourselves immersed in Europe. That people are from different countries, different social categories, different professions are talking across each other. And for some reason, at the moment anyway, the EU institutions and those people who favor TTIP have lost the communications battle, for sure. And so it's actually quite useful to have the pause that is being imposed upon us over the next 6 months or so. And if the new Commission has the ambition of regenerating public support for TTIP, then it's going to have its work cut out. But it's got to, amongst other things, have greater contact with the European Parliament. But who the next Commissioner for Trade will be is going to be very important in this context. And I think there have to be proper consultations and to get it right. I'm personally convinced that it is in the long-term interests of the European Union, particularly at this time when we need growth and employment prospects. But at the same time, we have to recognize and respect the legitimate opposition that is felt very, very strongly in many countries. So it's quite a big problem for the next Commission.
Thank you, David. But using TTIP as an example, I think it's clear that the future is more uncertain. Doru, would you like to just come back on what the panel has said on your presentation, and then I'll throw it open to discussion.
Yeah, well, I can only add briefly to this that while I agree that it will probably have to be done via an agreement between the two big groups, the business environment may also want to take into consideration that since they are open to discussing with all the MEPs, there are big differences between the MEPs at the far right, which may make the difference. So if you have the Front National at the one end, which is the very protectionistic far-right party, and along them it's also the Austrian FPÖ, while on the other hand, you have at the other extreme, you have UKIP and you have the PVV, which are not that much against the free market and against trade in general. So that may be of interest.
Thank you, Doru. Okay, I'll throw it open to you for questions and discussion. I'll take 3 or 4 questions, and then we'll answer those comments. I'm going to go from my right around. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, Andres.
Yeah, right. So, Anders Bannett from the Public Affairs Council. My question is about the internal cohesion of the political groups, because we tend to look at them as single, sort of relatively single blocks. But given their interest in attracting such a large number of independents, they're going to be probably more diverse than before. And I'm curious about the speaker's view on how much that's going to hold on.
Okay, thank you. So cohesion of the party groups. The second question was there.
Thank you. I'm Herlinde van Hoornk from Social Platform, a European platform of social NGOs. My question is a bit following up on what Mr. Frantescu already explained a little bit, possible impact on policies. There is now a midterm review coming up of the Europe 2020 strategy, and my question would be if you foresee any impact of the new elected parliament, the new composition on this strategy, in particular on the 3 social targets, being the educational target, the employment target, and very importantly also the poverty and social exclusion reduction target. If you see any positive or negative evolution happening there. Thank you.
Okay, and then I had one here, and then at the back.
Thank you, David. Ronald Jan Meijer, San Antonio Communications. Doru mentioned in terms of energy that there will be more support for shale gas, for nuclear energy, and for an intra-European energy infrastructure. I was wondering if I could invite the panel to say a bit more about support for renewables under the new European Parliament. I'm afraid I already know the answer to that, but I would like to have that confirmation.
Okay, and I've got 2 more, which is here and then Ignasi. The second round of questions will start at that end of the room and work this way.
My name is Ivana Volochi. I actually work with the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Forum, which is communicating more neighborhood policy. I would like just more to comment rather than put a question, because we have touched in this panel a lot on the lack of a communication and the communication deficit, which comes back and comes back. And so basically, from my perspective, I mean, a lot of people kind of think of post-crisis Europe, and they kind of think of it as a European problem, sort of European integration problem. And how do you think this will be dealt with? And which is actually, for me, not surprising, the result in France, where you would have only one single channel, Euronews, translating the European debate. So, and bringing back again and again this issue of lack of communication, and I'm Ukrainian, and I see this as what has some of the lack of your communication, what happened as a result in my country, for example. I really would think that any sort of communication would have to start today, and not just, in the run-up to the elections. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final one in this round.
Hi, my name is Ignacio Guardans. I'm a former MEP and a lawyer here at Kennel Gates here in Brussels. We are analyzing the results, and of course, all what you're looking around, and Doru and the others, is the impact in the parliament itself. But I believe that the results have an impact outside the European Parliament. It is in national parliaments. And in fact, in some countries, the results where they have produced an earthquake is in national politics and in national EU policies. That's in France. That's going to be in the UK. It's going to be in Spain. It just blew up the whole opposition. So the whole Socialist Party needs to reinvent itself, even probably the government. So shouldn't be an essential part of the analysis of what's going on and what's going to happen in the Council. I mean, in national parliaments as such, but if we look at from our angle here at European politics, how much a change is going to come in the voices, in perhaps, if I can say, in permanent representations in the Council. How much a change can we expect in positions? Because this is also a result of yesterday's vote.
Okay, thanks, Inez. Okay, Doru, don't all the panel, don't feel you have to answer every question for 5 minutes, please. And short responses will do. We'll start with Doru and work this way.
Okay, I will answer shortly on the cohesion of the political groups question, because this one I know very well. I've been studying it for quite a few years now. The cohesion of the political groups has gone up for the past 20 years, and I wouldn't expect that trend to reverse itself in spite of the results of the elections. On the contrary, I would expect the big groups to become even more disciplined, because now they will have to rally around their leaders more often in order to get the right numbers in the plenary to push through legislation. So I wouldn't worry about that. They have become more cohesive in spite of the increasing diversity, cultural and geographical diversity. On then social and poverty targets, I wouldn't expect those to be affected. Or if they were to be affected, I would expect those to be affected positively, let's say. On the impact of the results elections on the governments, yes, there will probably be a lot of pressure, particularly in France, UK, and the Netherlands, and that will make the negotiations in the council lengthier and more difficult. Because now the nationalists will have more say in the parliament, but also they will have more access to information, and they will bring that information back into their capitals and make a lot of noise with it down there. And on the renewables, well, what I said is that the parliament will continue to support these sources of energy, the classical ones, let's say. That doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to turn away from the renewables. No, on the contrary, there will continue to be support for renewables, judging by the numbers. But I wouldn't expect something spectacular to happen on that front. So I would expect something like a step-by-step approach, because the balance of powers in the views is quite tight.
David?
Yeah. So I take a slightly different view on the question of the internal cohesion of political groups, in as much as I agree that the political groups have become more cohesive in terms of their voting behavior, but in terms of their political cohesion, I'm not so sure. And this was one of the questions that was being put in my brief visit to the corridors of the European Parliament yesterday evening. Frankly, people just don't know at this stage whether or to what extent the deals that may be struck at a high level will be respected and implemented by the newly elected MEPs when they come to their political groups and are told, for example, if you're, I don't know, a Spanish socialist MEP and you turn up for your first meeting of the group and you're told that you have to vote for Mr. Juncker, you might find it difficult, or the other way around. And without going into too much detail now, the EPP with its internal structures, I think, has been very much a confederation of political groups with quite a lot of autonomy for the different national delegations. And rather than sort of getting everybody together to thrash out a common position, it's more a question of each national delegation reporting back to the bureau of the group and then sort of trying to find the lowest common denominator. I caricature only slightly. And I think that's going to get more difficult. And also because the lid is being lifted off two fairly disciplined groups in the sense that their chairs are retiring. And in the case of the S&D group, we've had Mr. Schultz was there as chair for 7.5 years and was still taking an active interest in the S&D group over the last 2.5 years. And similarly with Mr. Doru, he's also been around for quite a long time. And we know very little. As most, I think, informed observers of the Brussels scene and the Parliament scene know relatively little about who the candidates are going to be for group chairs. And we had heard that Manfred Weber, for example, was keen to put himself forward as chair of the EPP group. And he comes from the CSU, which managed to achieve the lowest result in its history almost yesterday, and a result which cannot have done Mr. Weber's credibility as future chair of the group that much good. On communication, I think the stock answer, which has still never been done, is that it'll only ever work if the EU institutions work in partnership with national governments on communicating the benefits of the European Union. And Mr. Guardan's excellent question opens up all sorts of possible avenues of response. The first is, indeed, it will probably not, I hope this is not a hostage to fortune, but it will probably not be too difficult for the European Parliament structures and procedures to assimilate these perhaps initially difficult-looking people and groupings from different countries. It's been done before. The numbers aren't all that much different this time than in the past. A lot of them just won't turn up. Those that turn up will turn up not necessarily to make a contribution to parliamentary life, but for other more material reasons. And so it's probably going to be a difficult sort of bumpy ride for the first few weeks, but then everything will settle down within the parliament. However, Mr. Guardan is absolutely right that it is a problem for the member states, and without wishing to sort of sound as though, as a convinced pro-Europe person, I think it's sad that some of the media coverage already of the results last night was saying that this is a mega crisis for the European Union. It will become one if the member states' governments don't deal with the problems that have been thrown up by the results in their country. It is not Mr. Barroso's fault that Mrs. Le Pen got 25% of the vote in France. I would submit, others may differ. But in the long run, at the end of the day, it's all linked, because the member states are members of the European Union, and the institutions of the European Union are supposed to work in concert with the governments of the member states. And I do think that on that last point, going back to the presidency of the Commission issue, I would hope that we are going to avoid a confrontational mess between the Parliament and its prerogatives and the heads of government who don't quite understand why the Parliament is doing this. I think there's a lack of political understanding at the highest level in the European Council at the moment. They don't get, the individual heads of government don't understand, don't get what politics is about in a European context. And so there's a lot of work to be done on both sides to try and bring them together and to find the common interest. And if we don't do it, the people out there who are suffering from the mismanagement by the institutions and by the governments of the financial, banking and social crisis of the last few years, they're not going to forgive or forget the people that were responsible.
Thank you, David. Afka?
Yeah, thank you, David. I tend to agree with the sir in the back of the room. All politics are actually local, so famous words. But so I actually think that that it's not so much about Brussels, but much more about the local politics and how this is going to be translated there. And on the cohesion of the groups, yeah, well, a very good example will be if Marine Le Pen and Geert Wilders are able to force their group, the European Alliance for Freedom. And I think they have met the criteria, because I think you have to have 25 MEPs coming from 7 different countries. So they met that, so we will see. But in the previous legislature, in the former parliament, they actually voted differently on half of the dossiers, as most of the people in this room know. So we will just have to wait and see how cohesive they will be in the end. But as said in my earlier, when I earlier commented, also within the Liberals, but I'm sure also at the EPP group and the S&D group, there will be a lot of incompatibility, there's a humor, and a lot of people that are not willing to work together, and conflicting personalities. So yeah, that's just politics, and the people within the parliament will have to deal with it, and it's us political junkies and media to comment on it. So, but that will be very, very interesting. And for a company like Microsoft, it was actually very, very welcome that the candidate, Mr. Juncker, made the digital economy his very first and most important priority. And he actually made one of the comments that I actually wrote down, that he said, well, you don't have to be a techie to believe in technology. So coming from his mouth, that was actually, well, very good and welcomed. And commenting, actually responding on the questions about energy and transport and all that is technology. So the digital economy should not be siloed. It's a transsectoral phenomenon. So the digital economy is all about transport, energy, renewables, all that. So I'm really hoping that all across the groups and all across the continent and the UK, that people will be willing to see this, and that we will have to compete with the United States, China, Asia, and whoever to be good at this. So I hope this could actually be a team where MEPs could and would be willing to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Afka. It will certainly be interesting to see whether campaign themes, such as digital, which was such a big part of the campaign, follow through into the new mandate. Absolutely. Fabian.
I'll try to be a little bit more upbeat, but I think I might fail. On the internal cohesion of political groups, I think if we look on the more extremist side, it will be extremely difficult to keep some kind of cohesion. The actors there are very diverse. They come from politically very different backgrounds and history. They also tend to have a large number of characters, which are always difficult to keep in line. But I think in reality they don't care. As long as they can form a group and get the power that entails, they won't care that much that the different members of those groups will actually vote in a different way. So I think fundamentally for them it's about forming the group, not about what that group then actually does. I think what will be much more interesting is to look at the internal cohesion of the mainstream parties. And there I think it might well be that we see key differences in the positions of some of the national big actors. It could be that in a country, for example, one of the big mainstream parties might take a different view on TTIP than other mainstream parties within the same group. That's, I think, a much more difficult conflict to deal with. On this question of the social targets and also on energy, I think we've got two different trends. We have what I already mentioned, this wish to have less Europe, and I think that will affect a number of areas. But I think we shouldn't forget there's a geopolitical question here as well, and particularly for energy and for issues such as trade, TTIP. If member states see the geopolitical significance of this, we could well see much more movement in those areas. I think I would also say that I think what we probably will see across the board is what I would call the spread of the British disease, that you will get positions which are derived at the domestic level, purely with reference to the domestic debate, looking very much at the extremists within the country, the populists within the country, and then having very little room for compromise at the European level. So we will be stuck in a number of areas because simply the ability of big parties to make compromises will just not be there. And just a final word on communication. I think communication, it's an old debate which in the Brussels bubble we've had for a very, very long time. I think communication suggests something about that we are doing the right thing, we just fail to get it across to citizens. For me, maybe there's a need for a bit more self-reflection here. Maybe there's something in the processes we're doing which isn't the right thing, where we have to actually change the way we're doing some things. And I think, at least from a pro-European point of view, I think what we need to get away from is communication. What we need to get towards is engagement, to actually get people involved in the processes, make sure that they can participate, that their voices are heard, not just in the election period, but throughout the year. That's far more difficult. There are now new ways of doing it, and new technologies, I think, are one way we should look at much more carefully. But I'm afraid that's probably not what's going to happen. What's probably going to happen is that in a very short time, we will go back to business as usual. And the whole question of engagement, communication, will die down again. And we've had this debate after the last European election beforehand, and nothing has fundamentally changed about the way we engage with citizens. And I think that is a major danger for the whole European integration process going forward.
Thank you, Fabian. I'll take two short questions or comments from this side of the room if they are there. Otherwise, I can see one hand here. Okay, you're going to be the last comment, the last question. Sorry. Okay, one here and one there.
Hi, Eloise Todd from the One campaign. We've been trying to get MEP candidates on the record in support of development and international issues during this election, because we're a little bit worried about the complexion of the Parliament next time. However, my question is very simple. I just wondered what the panel thought, if you could give me your view of who you think will be the commissioner put forward from your country that you come from.
Beautiful question.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, Jennifer Baker from IDG News. My question is simple, but probably not easy, and that's what does the panel think is going to be the sort of outcome of the horse trading on committee chairs, and how that's going to play out in the Parliament? And if I might just quick to Afka, Juncker's comment about not being a techie was widely ridiculed. He might have shot himself a bit in the foot there.
Yeah. Superb question. Thank you very much. On commissioners from your country, don't stick to your own country. If you want to suggest other nominees from other member states, feel free. Just do it quickly, because I'm conscious that there are sandwiches. David.
Okay, I would propose as Commissioner for Germany, Martin Schulz.
Well, for the Netherlands, unfortunately, it will not be Neelie Kroes for a third term. So probably something with a Labour background. Dijsselbloem, we heard actually his name in the back doors, but also the current Minister of Foreign Affairs. But these are all rumors. Nothing has been decided yet.
Fabian?
Yeah, I always find it a bit difficult to say what my country is by now. But for Germany, I think clearly it's going to be Martin Schulz, who I think is going to be commissioner, but not commission president. I think what we will also see is that there's a lot of pressure in the UK to put someone very Eurosceptic into a commissioner seat, but that depends a bit on what kind of portfolio the UK will get. I think if the UK doesn't get something which they see as meaningful, such as trade, it's going to be a very negative commissioner.
David Harley. What about Andrew Lansley? Any comments on yesterday's news?
Well, I think somebody who's was so effective in managing the NHS would be perfect for the No, but I think I'm sorry, I can't find the appropriate answer for Eloise. I have been thinking, but I can't really come up with a commissioner from the United Kingdom who would have the support of the Conservative Party and who could do a good job in Brussels. There must be somebody, but I haven't yet found it. Sorry.
Well, briefly from Romania, what I can tell you is that certainly it's going to be an S&D commissioner. It is very likely to be a woman, and I wouldn't exclude to be working in an area very close to your own.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Doru. And horse trading for committee chairs. Any comments? Start with Fabian.
It's very speculative. I mean, I think it depends a bit on, for me, it depends how the Grand Coalition does actually establish itself, whether it is a more explicit deal or more an implicit deal. I think if we're seeing quite an explicit deal, then they do still hold 55%, 60% of the total. They will use that also to get into the areas which they care most about. But I'm not sure whether they are quite yet willing to go public on a grand coalition. So it might be much more of an implicit deal which is taking place.
Any other comments, David?
Yes, well, apologies, but I don't like that question. But I suppose I can recognise that other people do. And I don't like it, first of all, because before you can come up with credible names for the chairs of the committees, you need to know what committees there are going to be. And as a sort of possibly a last thought to leave you with at the end of this very interesting and enjoyable for me and stimulating discussion, I wonder sometimes when, and I'm feeling slightly depressed, if the institutions have understood the need to reform and to change. And you can't quite see it yet, that comprehension of the need to reform and change at the level of their internal structures and the policy priorities and the working methods. As has already been said, we have to make a completely fresh start. And I fear that the work culture in both the Commission and the Parliament is still stuck in a pre-crisis mindset. And that's the first thing to change. When we can decide, what is the mission of the institutions of the European Union post-crisis? And from that definition of its mission, if it's core mission, then we adapt the structures, and then we find the best people to do the job in the new structures. So I would answer the question the other way around.
Okay. Thank you very much, David. I suggest we leave it at that. Obviously, the panel will be staying with us, and you have the opportunity to discuss with them over sandwiches and coffee upstairs. Thank you, everybody, for coming. The dust is still settling, of course. I hope this has shone through some light through the dust. I'd like a final thing to say. I guess that everybody in this room follows Europe Decides and follows on Twitter at Europe Decides already. I'd like to thank David O'Leary and my team in Burson-Marsteller particularly for making that such a fantastic success during the campaign. I think we've shone more light on this election through that website and through the initiatives under the heading of Europe Decides than ever before, and I'm particularly proud that we've done that as Burson-Marsteller. So thank you, David. Thank you for the team at BM. I'll hand over now to Mark, who's going to say the final word.
Just to say, thank you very much, our co-organizers, panelists, chairs of the panels. This was really a top-notch group of commentators. I think we can continue the deal-making and coalition-building discussions over lunch. It will be down here. Just behind that panel will disappear quickly. We'll have a light lunch available.